Chapter 15 Talking to Daddy. I woke up the next morning in a good mood. The presentation was over, and I'd done my part. Everything was as it should be, except my teeth felt fuzzy, like I hadn't brushed them before bed, but I always brushed them before bed, even when. Then I remembered. I went into the kitchen and made myself a bowl of oatmeal. Daddy was reading the paper. There was an article about the election the weekend before on the front page. Little Rock votes against integration, 19,470 to 7,561. Schools to be closed indefinitely. Daddy slammed down the paper, making me jump. Sorry, he said. But he scowled as he said it, and I realized then, certain as he could be, that when asked if Negroes and whites should go to school together, he had voted yes. Are you ready to go, Marley? I nodded, even though I'd only had 2 spoonfuls of my oatmeal. It was quiet in the car. Daddy gripped the steering wheel like he was driving in a snowstorm. Not that it snowed much in Little Rock, but I'd seen a movie where there was one once, and the actor clutched the steering wheel so tight his knuckles turned white. Daddy, I asked. What? Can you find her for me? Maybe get her phone number? Daddy shook his head. Marley, you need to leave that girl alone. But she's my best friend. She was your friend. Now she's someone else. No, she wasn't. Liz was funny and outspoken and clever, and I didn't see how all that had changed just because people were now calling her colored. But Daddy and I usually got along so well. I trusted him. I don't know, I said finally. I want to hear her side of the story first. Marley, you can't still be friends with Liz. Why not? Segregationists don't take kindly to Negroes who try to pass as white. Liz and her family are in real danger. The farther away you stay from her, the better. You're worried about me? I asked. Yes, I am, said Daddy. Why do you think I drive you to school every day? I shrugged. Daddy ran a hand through his hair. Do you remember when I invited that colored minister, Pastor George, to come speak at our church? I nodded. The next day there was a note tucked in with our paper. It said, You let your youngest walk to school tomorrow, she won't make it. And it was signed KKK. The Ku Klux Klan is in Little Rock? Daddy nodded. Who's in it? Hard to tell, since it's a secret organization. However, the Capital Citizens Council, or CCC, is not a secret club. Their avowed purpose is to support segregation in Little Rock. It seems reasonable to assume that some of their members are Klan sympathizers at the very least. Do we know any CCC members? I asked. Mr. Haroldson from next door. He was a nice old man who sometimes gave me penny candy. At least I'd always thought he was nice. And Mrs. McDaniels, Sally's mother, is a member of the Mothers League. What's that? I asked. A women's group associated with the CCC that formed last year to oppose integration at Central. That was a lot to take in. Isn't everyone allowed to have their own opinion? Of course, said Daddy. But the reason there were police all over David's graduation last May was not because people have different opinions. The FBI were there to protect Ernest Green because they were worried that someone was going to try to kill him. I had never really thought about why we gotten so few tickets to David's graduation, that Granny hadn't been able to go. Apparently, there was a lot I hadn't thought about. But you still support integration, right? I do, said Daddy. And I still talk to Pastor George. He's Betty Jean's husband, you know. I hadn't known. How could I? Why haven't you ever told me any of this? These are issues for grown-ups to deal with, not children. The Little Rock 9 weren't much older than me. Daddy sighed, but he didn't answer. I thought things settled down at Central once they called the soldiers in. Somewhat, said Daddy. At least that was the official story, but things were not ever pleasant for them there. Minnie Jean Brown got expelled. She was the colored girl who dumped a bowl of soup on the boys' head who were picking on her. That was something Liz would do. If they were still being harassed, why didn't they complain? Daddy shrugged. Maybe they did and nothing was done. Maybe they thought if they showed any weakness, it would only get worse. In any case, last year the pictures from Central told the whole world Little Rock is filled with hate. And now the town's gone and voted against opening the schools. We are not just a town of racists, but those of us who believe in integration. He shook his head. We can't seem to find our voice. Daddy was so upset for a minute, I thought he was going to cry. That scared me as bad as anything he'd said. I knew what it was like to have trouble finding your voice, so I reached over and patted his arm. He didn't look at me. I mean it, Marley. I don't want to scare you too much. I'll keep you safe, but I do want you to be careful, which means you stay away from Liz. I nodded to show him I understood what he was saying, but I didn't promise that I would. Chapter 16, Sent Away. That day at school passed in a blur. JT was surprised when I didn't have his homework. His mouth made a big round O, and I could tell he was talking, but I couldn't concentrate on what he was saying. For the first time, I noticed his ears were too small, his teeth were crooked, and his eyebrows looked like fat, blonde caterpillars wriggling on his face when he spoke. I couldn't stand the thought of Sally talking about what had happened with Liz, so when it was time for lunch, I didn't leave Mr. Harding's class, just sat in my seat and pulled out my math book to make up the homework I had missed. The first homework I had ever missed in class. Mr. Harding finished grading a few papers, then came over to my desk. Marley, he said, it's time for lunch. I didn't move. Finally, he left me alone doing long division in the empty classroom. When I got home from school, Mother and Daddy were already there. Daddy still had on his work clothes, but he'd taken off his jacket and loosened his tie, like he was going to dig a ditch in his suit. Mother'd taken the opposite approach. She'd put on pearls and a fresh coat of lipstick, and a new pair of white gloves. One look at them, and I knew it was bad news. My dread only grew when Mother announced that we were all going to a cafeteria for dinner. That was another bad sign. My parents believed in telling a person bad news in public so they wouldn't make a scene. Maybe occasionally we'd go by the cafeteria after church on Sunday, but out to dinner on a Tuesday night could only mean something was wrong. They waited until we had all our food. Then Daddy cleared his throat and said, Girls, we have something to tell you. I kept my eyes on my plate. They already knew about Liz. Had they found out about JT too and the homework? Since it appears that the schools are going to remain closed indefinitely, Daddy continued, and she's already missed a month of school, Judy is going to go live with Granny in Pine Bluff. She'll go to school there. Judy and I stared at Daddy in confusion. What? Judy asked finally. I glanced over at Mother, but she was stirring circles in her mashed potatoes. Daddy sighed. You're going to live in Pine Bluff with... I heard you, Judy interrupted, but I don't want to go. My friends are here, and Marley, and... I'm afraid you don't have a choice, said Daddy. You've missed so much school already. I'm doing the TV classes. Daddy shook his head. Watching a teacher on TV is no substitute for real instruction. You can't ask questions. I know you've been working hard on your assignments, but we don't even know how long the TV classes will continue. There are study groups, Judy insisted. Parents help out, and... Why can't she just order those correspondence classes David talked about? I asked. This doesn't concern you, Marley, said Daddy. My face stung like Daddy had slapped me. Of course it concerned me. My only sister was being sent away. Why can't I just go to T.J. Rainey with Margaret? Asked Judy. What's that? I asked. It's a private school that's just starting up, Judy explained. It's free. Daddy put his fork down a little too hard. It's not free. They're using public money that should be going to the public schools. It's Governor Faubus's way of trying to get around the integration order. I will not allow my child to be a part of that. But I know this isn't ideal, Judy, said Daddy, but Mother and I have talked it over. I glanced at Mother, but she wouldn't meet my eye. It didn't seem like she was too excited about this plan, but she wasn't speaking out against it either. You can't send me away. You can't! Judy was yelling now. Other people in the cafeteria started looking over at us. So much for not making a scene. I'm afraid we can, Judy. I know you're upset, but we're your parents. We know what's best for you. Daddy spoke quietly, but firmly. No, you don't, Judy hissed. She jumped up out of her seat and stormed off, knocking over Mother's cup in the process. The coffee dripped off the saucer onto the tablecloth. Mother and Daddy looked at each other. It was like they had forgotten I was there. It's the right thing to do, Maureen, said Daddy, but he didn't sound too sure about himself. First my best friend, and now my sister. Who was left? There'd be no one for me to talk to. Daddy might as well lock me in a tower like Rapunzel. At least she had the prince come by occasionally for a visit. But my hair wasn't long enough to climb up, and of course that was just a fairy tale anyway. And now that I knew what it was like to have a friend, I didn't think I could stand being so awfully lonely again. Marley? Daddy repeated sternly. I looked up, wondering how long he'd been calling my name. What? I tried to keep my voice icy, tried to tell him in one word how angry I was, but I think I just sounded kind of scared. Go into the bathroom and tell your sister we're leaving. If we go right now, we can swing by Margaret's house and she can tell her goodbye. Tell her, his voice broke, tell her she's leaving tomorrow. Tomorrow? But Daddy wouldn't look at me again. He fiddled with his wallet, pulling out a few dollar bills. Just go get your sister. I pushed my way into the bathroom. Judy was sitting in one of the stalls crying. I didn't know how to handle this. I wasn't old enough. I wanted to cry myself. Judy? Go away, she sniffed. They want to leave now. I don't care what they want. I didn't either. I'll come with you. What? We can run away. And go where? I thought for a minute. Granny's house? I looked around the bathroom. We can climb out that window and walk to the bus station, and that's a stupid idea. That's where they're sending me. That was true. And we don't have any money. Another good point, but I felt a little better that she had stopped crying. Come on then, I said. Daddy said we can go by Margaret's house on the way home. Judy went to the sink and splashed water on her face. I didn't tell her it didn't help. Her face was still red and blotchy. I sat in the car with my parents while Judy went inside Margaret's house. I kept waiting for someone to say, I'm sorry, Marley, or we know this is hard on you too, but they didn't. Daddy just drummed his fingers on the steering wheel over and over again, tapping out some melody I couldn't hear. Mother laid her head against the window and closed her eyes. A vein pulsed in her head the way it did when she had a headache. Finally, Judy appeared on the porch. I watched Margaret's mom give her a hug, and then she climbed into the back seat of the car. Thank you for ruining my life, Judy snapped. No one said a word as we drove home.